you know, when 2 years ago, when Kais Saied declared his coup, I mean, let's call it what it is, his coup, using the sort of premise of constitutional amendments or whatever. To be honest, I had very little trust and confidence in that it'll go through, or at least if it did go through, that it would last for as long. But for some reason, it has lasted 2 years. It looks like it's something that will be with us for maybe a while, maybe another year, 2 years, maybe even longer than that. And it seems that those who have been arrested, and particularly Sheikh Rached, who's now over 100 days in prison, it seems that they're going to be spending a little more time, to say the very least, in prison. So, I mean, the question that comes to mind is, how is it possible, how on earth is it possible that for someone like Kais Saied, who comes from outside the political sphere and who is democratically elected, I was someone who was glad that he was elected, and I'm sure that many, even Tunisians, were glad that he was elected. How could he, with one fell swoop, with one, you know, signature of a piece of paper, take over a country, literally take over a country? And where does that leave, you know, the Arab Spring? We're talking about the birthplace of the Arab Spring. We're talking about the Jasmine Revolution. We're talking about, you know, 12 years on from one of the most glorious moments of the history of this particular region, the Middle East and North Africa. So,
unfortunately, he exploited the crises that were present in Tunisia at the time, and he was preparing.
Crises such as what?
There was the pandemic in 2020 in Tunisia, and Tunisia obviously suffered a lot from that. There were, many deaths. Also, there was a political crisis which he created and fed by refusing to work and work positively with Parliament, with the government. He refused to work with the Prime Minister he appointed himself, as those who were following the situation would know. So he created crises and exacerbated existing crises, including the economic crisis in Tunisia, to lay the ground for his coup. In terms of the pandemic, for instance, we know that there were no vaccines available in Tunisia, and Kais Saied, in fact, hid the vaccines that had arrived in Tunisia, and they only came out after the coup. So Kais Saied used and exploited all the existing crises in Tunisia. As you said, Tunisia was the birthplace of the Arab Spring, and great progress was made since the revolution in terms of establishing democratic institutions, an independent judiciary, free press, guaranteeing rights and freedoms. On the economic front, however, the achievements were not at the level that people expected. And that was also exploited by Kais Saied. However, I think it's important not to talk about, the Tunisian revolution and the Arab Spring in the past tense, because Tunisians have not accepted that this is the end of the revolution. And the proof of that is the dozens of Tunisians, including my father, who are in prison. They are in prison because they have not accepted that the coup is the end of the Tunisian revolution.
Would you argue that your father and the dozens of those incarcerated, that they represent the majority of the Tunisian people? Because it doesn't seem like it. I mean, from the outside, it doesn't seem like it.
The only way of measuring minorities and majorities is either reliable opinion polls, which we don't have in Tunisia, or elections. And the last elections that Kais Saied held, based on his own constitution,
it was
that
shambolic.
he wrote himself,
It was shambolic.
only 10% of Tunisians took part in. If that. And that's based on, an electoral commission that he appointed himself.
Yeah.
So it's clear that, unlike it had been claimed, Kais Saied is not popular.
So you would argue, Ahmed, for instance, that that particular elections, where the turnout was closer to zero than it was to any respectable figure, you would argue, for instance, that in itself was some sort of referendum of the Tunisian people as to how they felt regarding the political structure.
Not only Kais Saied failed, during the instance of the elections, he failed on all the instances of his roadmap. The Tunisian people did not participate in the roadmap laid by Kais Saied. But let me come back to your introduction. How did it happen that Kais Saied came and took over power? Maybe we should have asked the question in a different way. How were we able in Tunisia to resist for 10 years of democracy? While all the other places where a revolution has happened, they either fell into a civil war or dictatorship came back. If we take a revolution and we compare the historic process of all the revolutions since the 17th century up to now, most of them do fall into civil war or a comeback of radicalism within the 2 to 4 years.
Yes.
So the exception really, which did happen in Tunisia. And that was, in my view, thanks to the approach of Sheikh Rached Ghannouchi, actually, his consensual approach, and that he was trying to bring about a revolution, a peaceful revolution, on a consensual process, which tries to bring everybody on board so that everybody will benefit from that revolution. Secondly, we cannot explain the coup of Kais Saied by saying that there was a crisis, because Kais Saied did not make his coup as a response to the cause of the people. No, he's made his coup utilizing the institution of the state. He's put a tank to block the government. He's put a tank to block the parliament. So there was not thousands of people, maybe some hundreds, yes, but there was not thousands of people in the street to say that we are refusing this crisis. And if the crisis is an explanation of the regime change, then it is really worse right now. Tunisians would not dream of living the hardship in which they are going through right now. So Kais Saied is not popular. He's a total failure by numbers. This is not just a propaganda, branding for what he is. He failed in all his process, in his roadmap, as a person who is governing solely, having all powers at his hand. He's failing everything. And right now, he's bringing the worst of what a human being can do by being a racist and by killing people, just throwing them in the desert. And short videos, having a mother with his baby, having a father with his son, just because they are black.
I take on board absolutely what you just said in regards with, that claimed roadmap that Kais Saied came up with. On every single point, there has not only not been any progress, there's been a
regress.
A regress in terms of economy, in terms of employment, in terms of security. And like you say, now there's an ugly face being shown that, regardless of all the other crises that you mentioned, Yusra, was never there.
Unprecedented.
It's absolutely unprecedented. I'm absolutely on board with that. But in regards with Sheikh Rached's approach, and I'm one that knows, following Tunis quite closely, and also having the privilege of knowing the Sheikh also quite closely for many years, I know the approach that he took. I know how he and Ennahda they gave up and forfeited many of their electoral gains and rightful gains for the sake of bringing people together and all political actors together so that basically democracy can thrive. And you're absolutely right. I do think that it's quite outstanding to think of Tunisia, that small country within that sea of oppression and instability and conflict, surviving for as much and as long as it did. But also, one has to consider the question whether that showed slight political naivety, probably, on behalf of Ennahda, maybe even on behalf of the Sheikh, to assume that that kind of approach wouldn't end in the way this it did. I mean,
I don't know whether we can say it has ended. It did not end. And the actual words of Sheikh Rached, and I was with him on the night, on the 25th. We were three of us, maybe four, with Ali Larayed and Noordin Bhiri, who are basically right now all in prison with Sheikh Rached. And what Sheikh Rached says that in the process of democratic and revolutionary process, we will have a fall down, but then we will recover and regain on this process. So the way Sheikh Rached sees it and perceives it is that this is a phase in the process of a democratic transition, and this phase of failure will give energy for a better restart and for the needed reforms for the previous phase. So yes, those 10 years of democratic process, they did and they do have their failure, they do have their weaknesses. And this is an opportunity for us to look back and to see forward how we can redeem those weaknesses and how we can have a rebirth of a stronger democracy.
I think that's happening now. If you compare now, we've had 2 years since the coup. If you compare the situation now and straight after the coup, you're talking about the small group that was there in front of Parliament, or the people who called it a coup at the beginning, they were a minority. My father, on the night of 25th of July, as Speaker of Parliament, went to say he rejects this, that this is illegal, unconstitutional. But it was a minority of parties and politicians who took that position. Now, 2 years later, we find there is great progress made in terms of uniting the position of the opposition, and not just in the rejection of the coup, but on reviewing the 10 years and agreeing on the practical reforms that should be done in terms of reforming the political system, looking at the constitution itself, and the economy, which is the most important priority.
On this, I have a slight problem. It's all good and proper, reviewing the 10 years and talking about what has happened and the mistakes committed or the shortcomings or the such. But to be honest, that shouldn't happen vis-a-vis or looking at the process itself of democracy and freedom. Meaning that any kind of experiment is fallible. It could fail. There could be mistakes. There could be shortcomings. But the basis of democracy, the basis of freedom, the basis of free choice is something that is non-negotiable. So even if things go bad, you still have the fact that you can change the leader, you can change the ruling party. But so I don't think that it's a good argument to say, well, we're looking back and we're assessing the past 10 years. That should happen in any case. What I think should be condemned absolutely is the fact that now, rather than having a Tunisia where people are free and they can make free choices and they do not fear prosecution because of their political choices, now it's a totally different situation. I think that is something that we must.
I think we don't disagree. I think that is exactly the same position that Tunisian, the political class and civil society has come to gradually over 2 years. There were those people who thought that this was a chance to, perhaps exclude their political rivals, or who thought that, democracy, is not a priority if, you are looking at, economic problems, etc. But what you are talking about is now the conclusion that we have learned, through this hard lesson. And this is now the position of the majority of Tunisians, who have now come to this conviction that an imperfect democracy is definitely better than dictatorship, and that stability and prosperity cannot be achieved through coups and through dictatorship. So that is important.
Ahmed, I visited Tunis several times over the course of the past 12 years. And every single time I had meetings with various political actors, societal actors as well. Islamic groups. I attended a debate between the Islamists, especially the Salafists, and the secularists, for instance. And I have to say that these discussions, as robust as the discussions were, the disagreements were, but they were fantastic. They were fantastic events. And you know what? We were even discussing with some friends, why is it that every time we want to hold a conference, we go to Istanbul? We should come more often to Tunis, because that was the kind of atmosphere that was there. And therefore, what's happened in Tunis is not only something that concerns Democrats around the world, or at least it should, but it actually breaks my heart, and I believe the hearts of those who witnessed what's happened in Tunis. What's happened in Tunis was miraculous. By the way, I take extreme pleasure in saying that I attended the first anniversary celebrations of the revolution in January of 2012. And I walked down Bourguiba, Shara Bourguiba, and I saw people gathering from all corners, raising all sorts of banners, discussing, singing, dancing, holding speeches and the such. And I have to say, it was one of the most glorious nights of ever that I can recall. The fact that it's, I can imagine that is no longer possible. Is something that is extremely hurtful, I have to say.
I think if we, just 2 points first. Democrats around the world, a democracy cannot survive just by its own. In the same way, dictatorship, a dictator survives because he has
support,
other countries who are supporting him.
Yeah.
The same thing is true for democracy. So Kais Saied was able and is still able to grip his power, his hands to have his grip over the power, because he's even being left doing whatever he wants, or some are supporting him. The international community, and I would say here the West, has allowed Kais Saied to go through his roadmap. So he's been given 1.5 years.
Yeah.
I took part in many visits, whether with the European Union, United States, Germany, France, Belgium, and we were telling them that what you are doing is wrong. They were asking us, why don't you participate in his roadmap? We were telling him, this is wrong. The value, we should refuse this, because in principle, this is a person who has made a coup. So the international community has given Kais Saied the chance to become the dictator he is. Secondly, the political elite was so fragmented so that the coup was able to be perpetrated, because the coup did not happen if the Democrats were strong and awake.
Yeah.
Now they are saying we are all against Kais Saied, but during the first, let's say, 6 to 1 year, when a German MEP went to visit Tunisia, and he was asking some of our I would not say secular colleagues, what is the priority? Kais Saied or Ennahda, they would say Ennahda would like to get rid of this party who has Islam as its basis.
Yeah.
But today, those ones are being burned by the fire of the dictatorship of Kais Saied. So if on the day of 25th, Sheikh Rached was almost alone facing that tank, today the question is, who is with Kais Saied? So it is a process.
That's an important question, by the way. That's a very important question.
So, I mean, that image, that very beautiful image you lived, I mean, have we lost it? I don't think so. I mean, an event in history, if it happens, it happened within a process. If it starts, in my view, it will not stop until it achieves all its ends. This has happened in Europe, this has happened in Latin America, in Asia, in other countries. And this process, which has started, yes, in Tunisia, went through all the Arab world, and then we had a counterwave. All over our Arab world, we as Muslims and Arab, this is something which we took, our people they were able to regain their freedom, and I think it is just a process which has started. It will not stop. The question is what is the price of the change? Should our people regain their freedom with a heavy price, with blood and killing, or can we be able to regain this freedom with the lowest price possible?
That's a good question.
What Sheikh Rached is trying to do, really, is to pay the least price for regaining this democracy.
When you say that a dictator can't become a dictator or establish him or herself, I'm sure there are some female dictators that we can also recall, without there being other dictators that give support or to lend support. In the case of Kais Saied, who are his supporters? Are they powerful elements within Tunisian society? Are they foreign powers? Are they regional powers? Is it the media? Is it the judiciary, for instance? Is it where does he get his power from? Why is it that he can act with such impunity? And often I've seen some of his meetings with his own cabinet, and it's disgraceful. I have to say, it's quite embarrassing. I mean, on several occasions, I cringe because I am thinking that minister who, in front of his own family, I'm a minister, but is sitting there being told off and lectured by this person who's clearly unstable, is quite embarrassing. Where does Kais Saied get this power from? Who gives it to him?
Unfortunately, he is enabled by counter-revolutionary forces, those who feel they have lost, their power and interests after the revolution, and they want to, re-establish the old system. And unfortunately, he is relying greatly on the part of the security forces, also the army, who traditionally in Tunisia have been apolitical and have played positive roles throughout Tunisia's history, including after the revolution. However, they have allowed, a tank to block parliament. They have allowed the president to continue, trampling on the constitution that he swore to respect. So they are, we must admit that they are, complicit in this coup. And of course, regional powers who have never accepted that there could be a real democracy in the region, and who were afraid that this will spread throughout the region
and infect others.
Indeed, this disease might spread in the region. However, we must also admit that those who claim to, promote democracy and human rights, and these, universal values have also either turned a blind eye to these constant violations of democracy and human rights and this systematic dismantling of democracy in Tunisia, or as we see these days, they are providing Kais Saied with, photo opportunities, aid, and legitimizing his illegitimate rule. We see Kais Saied, who at the beginning, was described as having huge, popularity. Yeah. Now it is clear he has lost that. Yeah. He has also, failed to solve the problems he claimed to be, ridding Tunisians of democracy in order to solve, economic problems. We find that he has robbed them both of their rights and freedoms and of, any semblance of prosperity or dignity in terms of, economic rights. We find that, Europe is rewarding Kais Saied for his destruction of Tunisia's democracy, and we must condemn that.
Yusra, it's staggering because, as far as I understand, and from following the narrative here in the UK, across Europe and such, the biggest problem that Europe has is illegal migration, right? So you'd think that the concern would be that the countries south of the Mediterranean are stable enough to ward off waves of migrants. True? And during the time when there was democracy in Tunis, it became almost unheard of that any kind of boats were leaving from Tunisian shores towards Europe. Yet as soon as the coup happens, immediately we have countless ships carrying countless people from Tunis as well as from neighboring countries in south of Tunis, hoping to reach the borders of Europe. So, this begs the question: what is the game that the Europeans are playing? I mean, is it not in their best interest to deal with a stable situation? Regardless, I'm not even going to talk about democracy because I'm tired of talking about democracy for people who believe it's at home but don't believe in pursuing it abroad. I'm going to talk about self-preservation and self-interests. Indeed. Why is it that Europe does not understand that instability, political instability, dictatorial authoritarian regimes such as the one that Kais Saied came up with are reason for increased illegal migration, which is a security issue? Why is that?
I think, if I could use the term...
forgive me for interrupting, but you said something quite interesting. You talked about those secularists or who believe in laïcité and such. And you said something which is quite fascinating, and that is that... And I'm going to take from... I'm trying to remember who it was, but someone who said that there are so-called liberals and so-called secularists whom hate Islamists more than their love for democracy and freedom, and therefore they're willing to accept an authoritarian system and regime rather than to have a democrat who belongs to the Islamic trend. It's quite troubling. It's extremely troubling.
It is sad, but it is true, and it becomes really. I don't know how to say more sad.
Yeah, it's tragic.
It's tragic. It becomes tragic when a European. It was a German MEP. Yeah. He's really defending Tunisian democracy, and he was really shocked. Yeah. He said during our visit to Tunisia, and he said what I mentioned. But the problem is that this weakness is not only in these segment of the Tunisian elite. Yeah. There is also European elite, whether in France and some populist countries right now, like what is happening in Italy.
Italy, for instance.
Yeah. And those ones, yes, they would say Islam does not have the right to be a source of inspiration, actually.
Yeah.
Because what Sheikh Rached has succeeded in doing,
Yes.
and what the Tunisian experiment has succeeded in showing, that yes, Muslims, if you could say Islamists, I don't like really to use this term because of this negative connotation, but I would say Muslims can be real Democrats in contrast with those who would brand themselves as Democrats and who would support dictatorship. So in my view, Europe is making the same mistake they've made during the 90s. And I've met a German diplomat, I would say, and he was really angry. He said, we do not want to make the same mistake we've done during the time of Ben Ali, so we are not ready to support Kais Saied. Some European countries are more than ready to support Kais Saied. So there are weaknesses in Europe. There are weaknesses in the Western liberal values, I would say, and these weaknesses are allowing values of, populism, of fascism, and of dictatorship to sneak in within the liberal West. And in this time where humanity is facing the fall, or let's say the weaknesses, difficulties of this system, with the rise of Putin and maybe, I don't know about the Chinese, so there are problems. In my view, it is an opportunity for us, Muslims, to say, well, yes, we can have a candle to light up some of these darknesses. What Sheikh Rached Ghannouchi, he's doing that. When he, rose the banner of Muslim Democrats, it is a way of saying that we Muslims, whether Arabs or non-Arabs, we can participate in the civilization of the mankind, humankind. And I think that is why my word was before we just started, speaking, I said, well, we are not victims, and we should not be portrayed as victims. Neither is Sheikh Rached Ghannouchi. We've chosen this fight, and we believe in these values. We believe in the values of democracy, not because of the West. We believe of the values of justice, equality, the rule of law, because we Muslims believe in those ones. And Sheikh Rached, as someone who is fighting for those values, he will keep going, because he could have, make a declaration and he would have been out of prison tomorrow, if not tonight. But because he's standing by those values, by our rights as Muslims to participate in the human civilization as others, and this is an opportunity. So we are not victims, we are fighting for these values, and I think we are doing that along with other people, not just us Muslims.
That's the same thing I wanted to say. Although obviously, I agree that the official European position, particularly this latest so-called, partnership agreement, is, something that, as you said, doesn't make sense, whether, pragmatically or, ethically. We must also recognize that there are MEPs and European politicians, and also in the US as well, senators who have condemned what is happening in Tunisia, who have condemned their own official, country's official position, and we continue to, meet with various diplomats, politicians, etc., who do believe that what is happening in Tunisia is something that can have consequences not only for Tunisia but for the rest of the region, and that Tunisia's return to democracy is very important, and something that all Democrats around the world should work together to achieve.
Actually, Anas, if you could allow me, you remind me of something. I've had a call last year, with Sheikh Rached over the phone, and I was a bit depressed. I told him, Sheikh Rached, people are not with us, and you see, he told me, listen, Ahmed, these values, there are people in the world who believe in those values. Non-Muslims in the West and those are our allies.
Yeah.
And we should believe in those ones, and we should keep working with those ones. So
he's always ever optimistic, and even now in prison, when
how is he, by the way?
Obviously, I have not spoken to him. I have not been back to Tunisia. My mother has been able to see him just once, although she goes weekly to deliver, food and clothes, as she had done, in the 80s. And now my mother's, 73 years old, and she has to go through the same again. But the lawyers who are able to see him more regularly say that, he is still optimistic despite everything, and using also the time in prison to continue his discussion with other prisoners from various backgrounds. And as we were saying, this coup has been an opportunity for even some who used to espouse this belief that you could exclude a certain component of society to come to the conclusion that is harmful for society as a whole and for democracy. So he continues to be...
He's in good health?
He is in good health. Last week was particularly difficult for him and for the rest of the Tunisian political prisoners, and we must remember that there are dozens of political prisoners, both from Ennahda, the two vice presidents of Ennahda, Saied Regime, who was also living here in the UK for a long time. He is in a particularly difficult situation in one of the worst prisons in Sousse, and his health is suffering. But last week there was a heat wave in Tunisia reaching over 45 degrees. So that was very difficult for my father as well. But generally, he is doing fine, alhamdulillah.
I'm pleased. I mean, given the circumstances and the permutations, but it doesn't surprise me. I've known Sheikh Rached for decades now. I think over 30 years since he first arrived in London. And I had the privilege of accompanying him, of traveling with him, of interpreting for him, as well as sitting in meetings where we discuss various issues. So it doesn't surprise me that he still continues on this path. What I am troubled by, however, let me frame it differently. We used to attend, I would say, dozens of meetings every single year held by various international organizations. And many of those I would attend, and Sheikh Rached would be there. And the themes would be along the lines of Islam and democracy, or Islam and terrorism, or Islam and the women's rights, or Islam and participation, things like that, which I was deeply uncomfortable with, but you have to accept what the organizers have laid out as a title, because basically it puts you on the defensive. You're going to start off by exactly as though, well, these two don't fit, but let's see what, how far you can take it. So it's not a good start in terms of the title. However, I note with extreme interest how we don't have those meetings anymore. Because, and I believe in this absolutely, because the question has been unequivocally answered. Muslims, and if you wish Islamists, whom you don't like the term of, have proven beyond any doubt, any shadow of a doubt, that they are Democrats. It's not just through rhetoric or theoretically.
They've gone to practice,
They've actually carried out, and if anything, they have proven time and again, whether it be in the case of Tunisia, or whether you look elsewhere, whether it be Libya or Egypt, or that they are the Democrats. They are the bastions, they are the defenders of democracy in those situations. And that's why it becomes so bewildering when talking to whom you would assume are democratic institutions and democratic figures working within democratic structures and systems here in Europe, in America, in Canada, and the such. You would assume that they would have a much deeper appreciation of the kind of cost that has been paid and continues to be paid because of Kais Saied's coup, basically. So this is something that troubles me to no end. But let's just focus on, okay, how do we see the future panning out? What do we think is going to happen? Only a few weeks ago, the Cordoba Foundation held a seminar whereby we had over 8 speakers from various organizations and backgrounds, mostly non-Arab, mostly non-Muslim, come and speak in defense of democracy in Tunis, as well as spoke very, very highly of Sheikh Rached. So you would think, emerging from that meeting, you'd think that this is the kind of representation, these are the allies that the sheikhs told you about last year. But how does it look for you? Both you sitting here, what does the next, let's say, year look like? Surely we're not going to do another program on Tunis in a year's time, please. At least when we come together again, let's talk about how democracy has won, how freedom has won, inshallah, how the sheikh is now free and his comrades and colleagues and the such. But how do you see things happening?
Well, I remember during the 90s, I've had it's a small literature text. In Arabic, لم يكن الصبح قد آن ولكنه كان قريبا. It is still there. It's like a dream, going back to our country and having all these people coming and this generation who didn't know about us. It has actually happened with Sheikh Rached when he went back to Tunisia, and thousands and thousands of people were there at the airport.
Yeah.
And the motorway was blocked because of the sheer number of people coming to receive him. People who don't know about him, they maybe have heard about him. The way I see it is that hopefully he will be out of prison.
Inshallah.
And the streets will be full of people. Cheering again, regaining their freedom. That's a dream and that's an image.
Yeah.
And how it's going to happen, Kais Saied took power by a coup. There are 2 options. He either can utilize the option of making another elections, which I seriously doubt that he will accept doing it unless he will has to do it. He doesn't have other choices. So the Tunisian people will go and choose to elect another president. They will certainly not elect him. Otherwise, he will leave power in the way he grabbed it, not by elections, but by the same people who put him in power. And that will happen when the institution of the state would believe that the house is going to fall upon their heads. So they will have to save the house and their heads. It is sad to say that it is going towards the second scenario rather than the first one. How long it would take? I don't think it's possible for Kais Saied to sustain power up to 2024. Things are really rushing. This is a building which is falling. So some regional or international power are coming to sustain it so it doesn't fall. If they pour their hands away, it will fall today, not tomorrow. Will they be able to convince him to go to elections? I think they are trying. They are putting or exerting a lot of pressure over him to release Sheikh Rached and all his comrades, and we need to thank him for that. It is better for him and for us if he goes to elections. It is sad to say that he is not going to accept that.
Yeah. Because, obviously, it seems that if he does take that choice, he's going to lose. There's no chance. Am I right? Or am I being a little bit too optimistic?
He doesn't seem to really, take these decisions in the way we would, rationally think and expect. I mean, if you look at the economic situation, for instance, which is, getting worse by the day. People talk about, the difficulties during the last 10 years in terms of the economy, and much has been said about that. But there's no comparison between that and what is happening now. What Tunisians are experiencing now is really unprecedented, queuing up for flour, oil, sugar, coffee, every single basic thing, shortages of medicines, vital medicines, electricity and water cuts, things that people never experienced before. The highest inflation rate since 1984. So every single indicator is really showing near collapse of the economy. And we see Kais Saied refusing even the IMF bailout. So we see that he has absolutely no plan, no vision, and no concern for Tunisians. And his only solution to all these growing problems is every single day to find a new scapegoat. It's businessmen, it's judges, it's the opposition, it's politicians. Before it was parliament, obviously now there is no parliament to blame. Or, now most recently and most dangerously, African migrants, who he, described in ways that are reminiscent of, European fascist great replacement theory, and led to unprecedented wave of racist attacks, etc.
I mean, it's populism really of the most grotesque.
Absolutely,
form,
and very dangerous as well,
absolutely.
Because he has created this, obviously, but it can get, and it has been getting out of control. And we find, sadly, that he is being rewarded for this by Europe. And as you said, I completely do not understand how they can expect him, having shown his inability to deal with the economy or with any of these challenges, that he can provide this so-called curbing of migration that Europe is asking of him. He has created these problems, as you have said. Migration is fed by despair and disappointment and disenchantment and poverty and all these things that have been born out of the coup and out of Kais Saied's disastrous policies. So, in terms of the economy, it can only get worse, and we don't know where that would lead in terms of, social explosions. Obviously, the opposition is continuing to try and unite. As we said, they have united their position against the coup, but they have not completely united in one front. They are working on not just opposing the coup, but elaborating a vision for after Kais Saied, post-Saied and post-coup, in terms of how we can reform the political system and deal with the economic crisis. Obviously, this will lead probably to more arrests and human rights violations. I mean, people hear about my father and other prominent names, but every day almost people are arrested or prosecuted for posting something on Facebook, for sharing a video, for simply expressing their opinion. But this is the price that will be paid. And as Ahmed said, Tunisians have been through this before. And through a similar dictatorship, and they rose against it and toppled it, and now they have experienced freedom and democracy, and they are not ready to go back to the same dictatorship that they rose against. That
might be right, and I hope it is. But looking at the map where Tunis lies, it's literally surrounded by conflict zones, by lack of democracy, lack of freedoms. And therefore one asks the question, okay, so how do you sow an organic plant in this kind of desertous terrain where you have no democracy, you have no freedom, you have, violence raging east, west, and south.
The idea is that there is no other solution but having a democracy.
It's not an option.
It's not an option. Why? Because he's failing.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have been, and he is not, he could have been a successful despot. He could have been a new Ben Ali, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, Ben Ali was able, he failed at the end, but he was able to survive for 2 decades.
Yeah.
But at the end, he failed. He failed as a state. He failed as economy. And that's what has brought about the 2010-2011 revolution. It was his failure. Kais Saied is a rushed failure during the first year.
Yeah.
And right now, is it possible to have another Ben Ali, a dictator bureaucrat? It's not possible because the Kais Saied has fragmented all the institutions of the states.
Yeah.
The international community is going through an economic crisis. Ben Ali came in where the West was successful economically, the economy was rising. So there is no other alternative. But the less costly scenario is regaining a democracy in Tunisia.
Yeah.
And this is for the benefit not only of the Tunisians, not only of the Europeans and the West, but even of our neighbors.
Yeah.
For example, Algeria has benefited from the best neighbor during the time of our 10 years of democratic transition. They had Tunisia as real allies, and right now Algeria is being weakened because of the state of Tunisia. The same thing for Libya, the same thing for Morocco, and for our African countries. So a Tunisian democracy, that model, is the less costly scenario, which is able to secure stability and which is able to secure their benefit. The same thing is for our northern borders in Europe.
Yeah.
So there is no other alternative but having this democracy and regaining it. Otherwise, Tunisia, yes, it will fall, it will become as a failed state, and instability will reign over the region, not only North Africa, but the Mediterranean.
Yeah, and Africa is crucial. I mean, now everyone's gazes are on Africa. China is trying to reach Africa through the new Silk Road, the Belt Road, with the war in Sudan, with the coup only a few days ago in Niger, for instance, and
which Tunisia ironically condemned. And also European countries have clearly and very quickly condemned it. Well, they had not done the same in Tunisia.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we overuse the term hypocrisy and double standards. But yes, time and time again, we're reminded of how problematic that is to not only foreign policy, but strategic outlook, generally speaking. And, I think I agree. I agree that the region, and probably the world, but the region definitely can't afford to have Tunis carry on this particular path.
And I think you said that, you're wondering why there isn't more of that realization. But I think it's important also to, to mention those who do have that realization and appreciate also the wave of solidarity and support that many have expressed, from politicians to thinkers,
human rights
organizations. And I'd like to mention also that on the occasion of the, to mark 100 days since my father's arrest, tomorrow we will be releasing an open letter signed by prominent politicians, diplomats, academics, judges, etc., from around the Muslim world, calling for the release of my father and other Tunisian political prisoners. And there have been, previous other solidarity campaigns. So I think there is this realization that what is happening is unjustifiable, and that Tunisia's success is crucial for not just Tunisia itself, but for the region and the Muslim world and beyond.